This is episode number 57 of the UpRev Ninja podcast, and I'm your host, Tom Hudson.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the UpRev Ninja podcast. If this is your first time listening, thanks for joining us. This show is produced each week with the single intent of discovering the tips, tricks, hacks, and lessons learned from our guests that has catapulted them into living the best version of themselves. Join your host, Tom Hudson, as he continues his search for the best methods to uprev his life. Now, let's dive into the show.
So this is a special episode. I interview a guest that I had on prior back at episode 10, Gmeinder, and then Coreyne Woodman-Holoubek. They have recently worked on a documentary that's about to be released here pretty soon, labeled If You Don't, Who Will? It's about empowered women and empowering women. You know, this was, you probably can sense some of my nervousness in this interview. Definitely something I'm super supportive of, but at the same time, I kind of feel like it's a little tricky, and I dive into that in this episode. But overall, I really appreciate what they're doing, and, I'm really looking forward to seeing this documentary when it comes out. So without any further ado, I'll welcome my guest. Hey, today on the UpRev Ninja podcast, I've got two very special guests with me today. I got Coreyne and Laura with me. How are you ladies doing today?
Great. Thanks, Tom.
I think I'm the one that had the MRI today. So, I've already read your bios out to my audience, but this is a little bit of a different show today. You've got a special topic you want to talk about today, but why don't you tell us just a little bit about yourselves and the background of why you're here with us today?
Thank you so much for having us. We're really excited. My background, I have a degree in adult education, and I was one that found myself in human resources. And the first 7 years of my career, I really enjoyed it, got to learn a lot. And then all of a sudden I had a quarter-life crisis where it just really wasn't feeling like a good fit. It was feeling like I was called to do more, but I was stuck and I was scared to make the wrong next decision. So I started getting really involved in community leadership. I took a lot of workshops, did a lot of self-evaluation, and kind of muddled through and processed a lot of emotions that I hadn't. And in looking really, deep in my heart and looking at my skill sets, I realized that it was because I was supposed to be out in the world really making an impact. And so I started doing some coaching on the side, and it really just snowballed for me. And after doing that for about 4 years, after 14 years in the corporate environment, I got up my courage and I said goodbye. Thank you and goodbye. They're amazing. I still keep in touch with everyone. And I went full steam ahead with my side gig big doing coaching and consulting. And I also do motivational and training, which I did is aligning my business with some of my strengths. I'm communication and woo for people who know strengths finders. And in that process of going out on my own, Coreyne and I, who had known each other for years and years and years, had reconnected being in a similar place in our business. And that's kind of how we got involved in some passion projects and the short documentary we're going to be talking about today.
Awesome. So I know all about winning others over. It's so funny. My wife and I just had an appointment, and I mentioned people with woo. When I have them on my staff, they're the ones that organize the lunch, the dinners, all the after work parties, and I'm a relator is my number one, and then it gets into communication, but then it gets into learner, and I don't remember what the others are, but I'm pretty black and white, so I have to have people with the energy to come out and make things big. But all right, so thank you, Laura. So Coreyne, what about give us a little bit of your background?
So my father calls me the perpetual student, and I'd have to agree with that. I started out with my degree in Spanish linguistics with Italian and Italian and French. And when I graduated from the UW, I had just come back from Sevilla, Spain for a semester. And I graduated and I was like, what am I going to do with Spanish linguistics? What am I going to do? So I said, well, I think I had met a gentleman in Spain. We got engaged, and I said, I'm just going to go with him to England and start another degree. So I started a degree in international business with Italian and French and Spanish. And from there, of course, I didn't stay with the gentleman, but I kind of ventured on my own and started at University of Plymouth in the UK in a personnel and development, which is what we call human resources here, master's program. And while I did that master's program, I also worked for the Wrigley M Junior Company in the UK. And they just kind of threw me in and said, okay, so now you're spearheading the new 360-degree feedback program and the Star Performance program for not just England, but also for you're partnering with your counterparts in the rest of Europe, in the Middle East, in Asia, and
Wow.
India too. So I was like, okay, sure, of course, let's do it. So I, they didn't renew my visa. I'm not really sure why. I think it was at this time, it was like in the early 2000s, and the economy was kind of down in the UK after 9/11. So I came back to the US and kind of muddled my way around in sales and retail and some manufacturing when I finally got back to global HR, and I was working with Emirath USA, which is a Swiss cheese company in Monroe. And at that point, I'd met my husband, we got married, and I just found myself not wanting to do the corporate thing anymore. And so it was interesting that my husband at this time asked me to join his business. So we kind of went out on our own. And at this time also, Laura had launched her business, still working in at a corporate, but also coaching. And Laura and I got together and we said, you know what, we could really make an impact for a different way of progressive human resources, and let's do it. So that kind of led us to the Disrupt movement.
Awesome.
And from there, we started having ideas. And for talking about StrengthsFinder, so I'm ideation and strategic. Those are my top two. So.
Wow, so the three of us should get into business together.
Yes.
I'm strategic too. That's why we got this synergy going here.
That's right.
I like it.
And my undergrad's in organizational leadership, so,
Oh, wow.
We could take over the world.
Yeah, I think that's what we're doing, just one podcast at a time.
Yep.
Well, so that's awesome. That's great. And, it's funny. I worked in Mexico and in Italy, and considering I worked in both of those, and I obviously working there, I lived in Italy for a while. I barely can count to 10 or say my name, because after working in one and the language was close enough, but far enough apart where it slaughtered any language I did know of those languages. So, so tell me about this documentary you two and your other partners are working on.
Yeah, so we were on. Oh, go ahead, Laura. we both like to talk. That's why we get along so well.
No, that's perfect. No.
We usually kind of do the back and forth. So with our Disrupt movement, which is a quick pace evening conference, we had expanded from Madison, Wisconsin to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and in driving back and forth and getting our arrangements made, we started having some really insightful conversations. And one day we were talking about, why don't we have more women leaders? A lot of the women that we see that we're friends with are just doing, amazing things. But when you look around and kind of the world that we're living in right now, the culture we're living in right now, it's like, where are all these amazing women leaders, and why aren't there more women? And, in the media, science, like, people are really quick to say it's a confidence crisis, where that just really simplifies it. And what does that even mean? Like, I always am working through my confidence and wanting to love myself more, but I'm still able to, really go out there and take a risk and to, grow past the boundaries of my comfort zone. And so is Coreyne and so many of the other women in our lives. And that's kind of where we started the project with those conversations.
So is your documentary about, I don't know. So you've kind of told me the thesis. What I don't have to let the cat out of the bag, but what were your conclusions?
So the documentary is about women's leadership and women's empowerment, and how women's leadership really looks different to every different woman, and how, if you're talking about the summary of it, that's it. Leadership just looks different to everybody. Everybody's the impact that everybody wants to make looks different. Don't compare yourself to others, and don't take things personally.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's something I don't know. I feel like a lot of people take things personally, and
Mm-hmm.
it does set them back. And my wife and I were talking about this evening before. It's just first off, I am deeply honored that you two are on my show and sharing this, and um. I'm already kind of set up, I feel like, to fail because my wife is like, well, no, it's not that. No, it's difficult because I'm in a leadership position. I work in the corporate world. I'm in on the leadership side of things, so I work with HR a lot,
Yeah.
and I'm in technology, so I see what I see these challenges that we have, and my wife, she and I were discussing this briefly. She's like, I know you're passionate about this, and you understand it, and I'm doing air quotes, because I think my heart understands it, but I'm a white male, and completely, like, that's not my world. So you can tell me these things, but it's so foreign to me. So it's hard to
Mm-hmm.
kind of hold my hand and bring me along to understand the experience and the pain and the tribulations that women have, breaking through the glass ceiling, I guess. Um, so I think that's why I'm saying I'm kind of setting myself up to fail, because I'm like, okay, how do I try to understand this? And not just me, but my
Mm-hmm.
audience. I've got a large portion of my audience are men. So how do I get that message to them and have them kind of open up? Obviously, if they're listening to the show, they're already open and curious about these
Mm-hmm.
topics. But how do we how do we change this? How do we make it
Mm-hmm.
better? How do we change this? And Laura, something I've been working on the last couple of months, I'm also involved in a lot of other conferences here in New Hampshire,
Yes.
and I want to say it was probably actually maybe in the fall or winter. There's a big conference. It's blockchain. Remember, I'm in
Mhm.
technology. It's a blockchain conference, and they had 30 speakers, and not one of them was a woman. And one of
Yeah.
my business partners noticed this, and he was a speaker, and he said, "I'm not gonna, speak unless you can change this, because there's all these different women in
That's
the
amazing.
blockchain world, and they made a difference."
Mm-hmm.
And, they invited some women, and that changed that conversation. And now we're starting to look at other aspects of our lives, like, ooh, what else? And
Yeah.
it's kind of disheartening, because it's like it's always been there, and it's just now being talked about and realized. So I'll get off my soapbox now.
No, I mean,
you know,
and kudos to you, because this is the second time I've been on when I reached out to you about the documentary, and
yeah,
Coreyne, you and invited us both on. You've been super supportive, and I love what you share, because we're on some conferences here too, and I think that is a big place, because it's like, if you aren't hearing the stories, if you're not having women stand up and share their expertise and experience, and it goes to the diversity and inclusion, it's not just about women, but what does that dynamic look like? Whether it's age, race, religion, like all those components, we need to, think outside of the box. And the only way we're going to do that is if we invite other perspectives to the table. So I really appreciate you sharing that example. And I know that's something that we've had to, work through as well. And one of the ways that men really can support women is to sponsor them in the workplace, and ask the women in your lives, what can I do to support you? That piece of it is really big, because sometimes it's just having these conversations to be open to that.
I agree. Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that again. My wife and I were just having a similar discussion tonight about support. I'm serious. I'm not making this stuff up. Like a couple of hours ago, and it's
I want to meet her.
she's awesome. It's so funny because for me, I don't this kind of shifting gears here, but the five love languages. Um, if you're familiar with that, I'm
Oh, yes.
okay. So
I train that.
okay. So I'm very, like, on the physical side. So a hug, or just that's who I am. And she's more on the action side of things. And so, like, if I take the trash out, or build the fence, or put a screen door in, things like that.
Yeah.
So, but it's so hard for me. Like, I know that, but that's just not my default neuro pathway that I have built. Like, this is what I like, therefore that's what you like. And I think it's trying to break through that it's like a paradigm shift, trying to break out of that and say, okay, what does this other person need and want? What do they feel that is supportive of them to help them get to that next level, and having that conversation and remembering it and executing against that. I think that's just it's what we all do as leaders, or should be doing as leaders. And it's difficult. So you've interviewed and, you've worked with a lot of women through this. What are some of the common themes that you two have come across?
So we mentioned a few of those before, being that, leadership shows up differently for every woman. And really about women is that how we internalize the leadership in ourselves and what it looks like. And also a lot about women's leadership is about the impact that we have. So if you can't have a woman look at and focus at the impact that she's having, it's really hard for her or her counterparts to see where they can go. Also, we mentioned before, don't take things personally. It's a lot about, women are very afraid to receive feedback, ask for feedback. And in order for us to grow, that's part of what we need is feedback. So how do we receive feedback? How do we ask for feedback and in a conscious and constructive way? And how do we take that and how do we go forward? And what you were talking about before, what do you do in order to support women, or you want to ask questions? I think that the best thing to do is to be curious. Be curious every day. And if you're curious, nobody is going to criticize you for your curiosity. It's because you show that you care and you show that you're interested.
Yeah.
And so more women are apt to open up to you.
Okay. Yeah, no, I like that. And it's true. I think, I think it's, and I could be wrong. I mean, I'm almost 42. And, when I got into the corporate world, it was, late 90s. I was working at GE. And at that time, sexual harassment was the big topic that HR was dealing with. I don't know what it was before that. I don't know if it was fax machines giving people problems or if it was something else. But, regardless, I think one of the things that happened out of that was it caused I think it prevented a lot of men from having some of these discussions with women because they were afraid. There was fear that kind of got built in with some of that training. Like, okay, how can I be supportive? But, is that a negative? Is there a negative connotation when a man says that, especially in a workplace? So I think it's like a juxtaposition, right? Where I think not just men, but I think everyone wants to be inclusive and we all want to be supportive because we're all on the same team, especially, if you're in a business together, you're all trying to get to the same place. You want to be successful. If you're in a marriage, you want to be successful. No one gets married because you want to go through a divorce. No one joins a company because you want to go bankrupt. So, how do you bridge that gap and get over some of those, past traumas or fear or the poor education that we went through at one point in our career that, made us fearful to have these kind of conversations? How do you get past that?
Well, and I think that goes to the kind of company culture that you're wanting to create and those conversations, because, we go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And if you're not safe, you can't have the self-actualization and all those other pieces that you need to have those conversations. And I think about myself and my experience. I got so lucky because when I was an intern, my mentor was my boss, a gentleman who was towards the end of his career, and he was amazing to me. But I can imagine if my career went a different direction, I didn't have someone who from day one was really sponsoring me in the workplace, because, one of the things that we also looked at when we did the documentary was the fact that what does that look like with not having a lot of women leaders? Because if you can see it, you can be it. But at the same time, because it kind of triggers your scarcity, because we're not seeing that many women leaders. So women aren't necessarily, taking the hands and pulling the other women up with them. And that's why men's role is so important, because there's no stigma if a man sponsors a woman and tries to help her get a promotion. But there is a stigma, and it will actually hurt the woman's career who's trying to advocate for another woman if she is trying to help her get a promotion or a raise.
It's so sad. I say this makes sense because I think our culture tells me it makes sense, and that's really sad. I mean, I don't think I've ever witnessed that. I hope I've never witnessed that. Now I'm gonna kind of go back and reflect over my 20 plus years in the corporate world.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's pretty sad. So yeah, that's yeah, thank you. And like I said, it makes sense, sadly. So it was kind of going through some of the items you said in your summary. You rise together, empower, mentor women, and you've been talking. Both of you have been talking about that. Let's say if you've got a workplace, it doesn't matter if it's 50 people in the company or 50,000. What action steps have you seen work or feel like it would work based on some of the discovery that you've done working with these other women that people could implement in their day-to-day lives inside or outside of work?
I think that one of the main things is looking at why women leave the workplace and looking at how you or organization can help women keep the same roles and be flexible with those roles. Take, for example, maternity leave. So a lot of women that are interested in their careers, and some women at the same want to come back, it's hard to take 14 weeks off, right? You want to be with your baby, you want to be with your family, but you still need that inclusiveness of the workplace. So rather than having a hard and fast rule of having, okay, you're 14 weeks off, you don't come back to the workplace, working out ahead of time, could you come back for a little 5 hours out of the work week? Could you do your emails for 5 hours out of the work week? How can we get you involved? And that way your career progression stays. You don't feel like you've left and then have to start over when coming back. And you also don't have to feel like, for lack of better words, you're a pariah now because you have a family and you have children and that's another focus. So that's what happens a lot of times, is that women go out on leave, family leave, maternity leave, and when they come back, they're not given the same opportunities, they're not looked at the same way, and the policies and practices that applied to them before don't apply anymore.
And I can appreciate that. I'm just making an assumption here. The 50s weren't that long ago. I mean, that so
Mad Men.
Yeah, and that was a completely different world, right? But that was our parents,
Yep.
or our grandparents maybe. But so it wasn't that long ago. So part of that culture obviously it's not a light switch. It didn't just go off overnight. So I mean, part of that culture was ingrained in us, with our upbringing or whatever. I pretty much stayed with my grandmother growing up. My mother was a nurse. She worked a lot, but I lived with my grandmother for the most part, and she was a stay-at-home mom, and my grandfather was out doing his thing, but she was expected to do those typical gender roles, cook and clean and laundry and everything like that. And that was my grandmother, and that's for the most part who raised me. So if that's still a part of the kind of fabric of our society, no wonder it's, oh, she's gone out for maternity leave. She's going to come back, but she's going to be more focused on family. And just like they do, it's thin slicing, they've already made a judgment without even considering it. It's just like a decision was made and they didn't even think about it. So with things like that, and I loved some of the things that you said, a part of me cringed about, like, I'm on maternity leave and I'm going to work 5 hours a week. I get that. it seems like it's bigger to me that you shouldn't even have to do that, because I know they're offering men leave now. Companies have been doing that for a while now. So what about like mastermind groups or support groups, or women's leadership summits and companies, stuff like that, to learn how to teach some of these skills around fear that you talked about, embracing obtaining feedback and not taking it personally, so on the education component. And then on the side of men, how do we break this automated decision that men have in their brain that some of them are making and they don't even know that they're making?
Unconscious bias, right?
Yeah, it is.
I mean, it's big. And I think to your point that, conferences and trainings and affinity groups, I think it's a matter of how it's executed and how it's embraced, because we've heard about, really great opportunities and things that really are being supportive of women and everyone in the workplace. And then you also hear, one of my friends is at a Fortune 500 in Chicago, and she was like, I really want to recommend, you and Coreyne to come in and show your documentary. And she said, but right now our women's affinity group is a joke. She's like, they just aren't, that isn't effective. It's people that don't want to do their job, and they just hop from one affinity group to the next. But so I think, it really is like, how is this being impactful, and what are the results to say, what does this look like if we're investing time and money into building each other up? And I think that what you're seeing more too is that whether it's a conference, whether it's training, to say that we need to do this together. Yeah, some of the conversations we need to have is, women being supportive of women, but some of that too is like, how do we work together? How do we create a safe space where we can have those conversations? And I love that Coreyne shares about maternity leave and other things like that. And anytime questions come up, I always defer to her, because I don't have kids. I don't have a family. My life is completely different like that, but I can have empathy and I can try to understand. And I mean, she's supportive of me. I went through a breakup earlier this year and was just not able to do what I needed to do some days to get through, needed to take a step back. And she was very supportive of that. So I think that we need to realize that we all have a lot going on, and we all really need to be there to support each other.
Yeah, I completely agree. And like you said, it's all about, if you're working for a company or if you're in a relationship, you get into that not wanting it to fail. So I completely agree. I mean, I think it's, it's open, honest, and transparent communication,
Yes.
and, being vulnerable, which that's the whole reason I started the show was, about
Yes.
vulnerability and understanding about, what are my, what are the fears that I have, and what do I not like to share? And if I can share that with you and you can do the same to me, it's going to make us stronger, and, we're going to achieve whatever our goals, hopes, and dreams are. So,
yes. And I always say too, that having an uncomfortable conversation, even just acknowledging that, I'm really uncomfortable to talk to you about this, but I really just need to talk to you about it, because it doesn't go away and it hurts productivity, and it costs, what is that cost of that then too, if we're holding back, if there's conflict, if things are just not what they need to be.
So how do you, what would your recommendation be for, let's say, someone's out there listening to the show today and they're like, this is, I've not thought about this, or, hey, this is something we need to implement in, my company. What would you, what kind of advice and, suggestions would you give them to get started?
So I'm going to answer your question, Tom, but I'm going to go back to the maternity leave, because you made a comment about how we shouldn't, as women, we shouldn't have to go in on our maternity leave to work.
I'm sorry if I should have. I didn't mean to.
But again, we're trying to change the landscape here.
Yeah.
We're trying to say, again, leadership looks different to everybody.
Right.
Impact looks different to everybody. And maternity leave is going to look different for everybody now. And there are women out there that want to go into work. They want to feel they can have their family and have their work. And it's really up to the organization to help them achieve that and help them rise without saying, oh no, maternity leave, you shouldn't have to come in. You shouldn't have to do that. What if they want to? And part of that also is the fact that women, when we do go out of maternity leave, more often than not, and this is very taboo, but it has to do a lot with what we're talking about, postpartum depression.
Right.
And part of what postpartum depression is that we are shut away. We're excluded. We're, I'm not going to get into breastfeeding or anything.
Yeah.
But, and going into work would definitely help us with our self-esteem and with what we're dealing with. And again, anybody who wants to stay home, I think that's great. But again, things look different for everybody. It's realizing that it's not one size fits all.
No, and thank you for that clarification. And I do appreciate it. It's I do believe a partnership and like, hey, how's this maternity leave going to work, and a partnership to figure that out. I don't want cookie cutter. And just to make sure my audience doesn't get upset with me, like the should piece isn't like, it's just, like if that's what you wanted, if you wanted to take 14 weeks off, you shouldn't feel that you have to come in. That I guess that's so. I think we're saying the same thing. I just.
Oh yeah, definitely. I wasn't getting upset. I was just trying to clarify.
No, and thank you for that. Yeah.
I love the perspectives.
Yeah, I do too. And it's interesting. I'll share a few things with you after the show, but you're hitting on so many things here. It's great. So thank you. But
we might have to come back.
I know. So I think were you going to say something else, Coreyne?
Yeah, I was going to answer your question about, and I think what you asked was if someone is interested in, if an organization is interested in implementing, showing the documentary or implementing the findings of our documentary, how should they go about that?
Yeah.
So the documentary will be finished, polished, and out to the film festivals coming this fall and into 2019. And anywhere from there, we look to make it a series.
Oh, nice.
Yes, so that's what we're hoping for. And then from there, it's really, sky's the limit as to what this looks like, bringing it into organizations, bringing in toolkits, doing seminars, and Laura's got a lot of great ideas on this. So
now, and that's great. I guess let me ask the question a different, just one more time. What would this stuff really strikes a chord with me, and I want to make a change tomorrow? What could I do?
I would go and look on our Facebook and look at there's a lot of content that we've curated on our Facebook page. If you're interested in learning more about women's empowerment, women's leadership, imposter syndrome, about some of the things we discussed in the documentary, about comments from other women, go to the Facebook page. There's tons of curated content that you can start there.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm really curious what film festivals you're going to get into. With we have one here in Portsmouth where I live.
Ooh.
And it's awesome. My wife and I go. Well, we would love to say we've gone every year. We've went one year, but I've got two neighbors, and both of them have films there. And one of my neighbors had he won an award, several awards this past year for a fantastic documentary. So I'm kind of like in the hub of all this stuff. But so hopefully I'll see you in a few months when you're out here for it.
We would love that.
Well, so I know we kind of covered, like a broad brush stroke across a lot of different topics here, and kind of dived into a few things. But is there items specifically that you would like to talk about or kind of discuss about some of the findings, or action steps or anything along those lines?
Well, I think to your point, just having an environment where these conversations are welcome, and even just if you aren't always knowing, what's right, just, that dialogue around maternity leave and things like that, it just is really eye-opening to talk about it and be really candid. And I think that, sometimes that we're not doing that piece of it enough. And what we saw in the documentary as well was that every woman's leadership journey looks different. I think one thing that we haven't touched on that was something that came up in it with all the women is just that, women internalize a lot. And so they struggle often with having that inner negative voice, the inner critic, whatever you are calling it. So I think to your point earlier about like, what are some of the things that, if a man is hearing this and wants to start today, it's like, start paying a lot of attention to the women in your lives and seeing where their emotion or where what they're sharing doesn't match up to the fact. Like, women really minimize a lot of their contributions. They are very quick to say the team has done something, which to me, that's like, shining the spotlight is an indirect way of taking some credit for it. So it's a start if you're trying to build your confidence. But sometimes that's what it's going to take, is to call out in a meeting to say, Susie, you got that report done a week early. You saved us $100,000. Being the cheerleader, the advocate, that encouraging them to be celebrating and to do it in a way, maybe not just in front of their boss, maybe in front of the VP or a different product line or something like that, so that their name gets out there, maybe in a way that it wouldn't.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And it's interesting. I know I've had training on that, like how people like to be recognized in front of groups or individually or via, email where they can still hide, but it's all good. And it's funny. I tend to not internalize, but I tend to put the spotlight on my team versus me. So it's funny hearing that. I'm like, oh yeah. So I actually resonate with some of this. But
because we're all human, right?
Yeah,
we have similar struggles.
Yeah. So, but thank you for that. Coreyne, what about you? Anything that we didn't touch on or cover that you would like to bring up?
Yes, I do, Tom.
Okay.
Thank you. So one of the things that I've learned in this process is to experiment and take small risks. And do that in a safe place. And once you feel like you have experienced and taken your risks and done that in a safe place, you can start going outside of your safe place. One of the stories that Laura and I tell all the time is that a very influential woman was in Madison for one of the local events, Rachel O'Mara. We talk about Rachel O'Mara all the time. And she had just written a book. She's an executive at Google. She's really, very influential, very what most women would consider to be outside of their league in a way. And we were talking, and I started talking to her because she was standing alone. And I introduced myself and I said, "Hi, I'm Coreyne." And she said, "Oh, what do you do?" And I said, "Well, I, with my partner, Laura Gmeinder, run this local conference called Disrupt Madison. We have one in Milwaukee." She's like, "Oh, that sounds so much fun." I said, "Hey, why don't you come to Disrupt Milwaukee and talk?" And she looked at me and she goes, "I'd love to." So small win,
right? Small
risk, big in outcome.
That's awesome. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say, she's one of the women that we interview.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's amazing. Like, and I've talked about this a few times. It's a little different perspective, more on the dating side of things. But like our reptilian brain has this. We're afraid of rejection. Because at one point in our history as a person living on this planet 100,000 years ago or whatever, if you got rejected, you could have got thrown out of the tribe, and your life was over potentially at that point. And it's only been up the last couple of 100 years where that's not necessarily the case. But you still have the reptilian part of your brain that doesn't want to be rejected. So doing those small little risks like that and building that confidence and showing you that there's no saber-toothed tiger jumping around the corner to get you, it's really going to be okay. And the worst thing they can say is no.
Right. And don't take it personally. Don't take it.
Yeah.
Because our brain isn't there to make us happy. You're right. It's there to keep us safe. And what does that even look like for women too? Like going back to tribal days, it was very important. Women didn't have financial security. They weren't farming. They didn't have meat, out hunting and things like that. And so it went back to the likability, the popularity, the elders wanting you to be around. And so like that piece of it was even more important.
Yeah. So it's funny, like there's the world's changed so much, yet it hasn't, and I know it's changing. It's definitely changing for the better. There's just a lot of, I think we've hit a lot of road bumps in the in the last year or two. But I think there's a lot of change, and I think people are becoming more aware and more open to change and trying to understand how it affects them and their loved ones and the people that they work with, which I think is definitely a positive. I honestly feel 20 years ago that wasn't the case, and maybe it was because I was 20 years old and I was entitled. I don't know, but I do feel like the world has shifted a lot over the last couple of decades. So, but anyway, thank you both for coming on, sharing this journey with me, and I'm really excited to see this documentary, and I really am very hopeful that it comes here to my hometown and you all get to come out, and but thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for having us. This is wonderful, and we hope to come visit you on the East Coast.
Yes.
I'm taking that as an invite to come in.
We get to meet your wife. Yay!
Yeah, absolutely. We have an extra bedroom, and but we live in downtown, so absolutely.
Thanks for listening to the UpRev Ninja podcast with your host, Tom Hudson. Navigate to our website at uprev.ninja today, where you will find additional resources to help you discover the best version of you. While you're there, join our newsletter and join the discussion on your favorite social media platforms. We've got some awesome guests lined up to share with us how they are becoming the best versions of themselves. Again, thank you for listening. Now it's time to go out and uprev your life.